The candles in the north corridor had guttered down to their last inch when Verity Ashford let herself into the empty ballroom, and she told herself, as she pressed the door shut behind her, that she was only coming to fetch the shawl she had left folded on a chair beside the musician's dais. She had left no shawl. She had never owned a shawl fine enough to leave in such a room. But the lie was for herself, and she had grown used to those, the way a housekeeper grows used to keeping the count of candles no one else notices. The ballroom of Harrowmere ran the length of the west wing, and by day it was a cavern of gilt and pale silk that dazzled anyone who was permitted to see it. By night, with the great chandelier hooded in linen and every sconce but two extinguished, it was a different room altogether. It was a room the size of a country church, and it belonged to no one. The polished floor gave back a low sheen, like a pond under starlight. Somewhere, a clock she could not see marked the hour, and she counted the strokes, because counting was a habit that steadied her. 12. Past 12. The house was asleep, or pretending to be. She stood a long moment at the edge of the floor, one hand resting on the cool jamb of the door, and she looked at the emptiness the way a woman looks at water she has not yet decided to enter. Her morning dress, made over 3 times since her father's ruin, hung heavy on her, and she was aware, as she always was, of the space she took up in a room. The broadness of her shoulders, the fullness of her arms, the weight of her that no clever seam could disguise. She had been called many things in her 29 years, and stout was among the kinder. On the shelf, they said of her, "Handsome enough about the face, if only she were half the size. A pity. A pity, a pity, a pity." The word had trailed her like a small dog through every drawing-room in the county. But there was no drawing-room here. There was no one at all. She stepped out onto the floor. The first step was hesitant, as if the wood might refuse her. It did not. She took another, and by the fourth, she had reached the great faded rose, sewn into the center of the parquet, the compass point of the room, where any dance in this house began. She lifted her arms, as if a partner had claimed them. Her right hand rested on the air, where a shoulder should have been. Her left rose to meet a hand that was not there. She was not a girl. She had never been a girl who was asked. But she had watched. Oh, she had watched. From the wall, from the doorway, from the seat beside the elderly aunts whose slippers she had fetched, and she had learned every measure by heart the way a starved child learns the smell of bread through a wall. She began, very softly, to hum. It was a waltz from her mother's time, a Viennese thing, full of soft sorrow, and she hummed it with the accuracy of long secret practice, and she stepped as her mother had once taught her in a rose garden long since sold. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. She turned upon the rose, and the heavy hem of her black gown swept a slow arc through the dust of a room that had not been danced in for 11 months. She turned again. Her breath caught, not from effort. She was stronger than she looked, and lighter on her feet than any who mocked her would have credited, but from the unbearable pleasure of pretending, just for an hour, that a body such as hers had been made for grace and not for use. And here is the thing you must understand, listener, before we go a step further. She did not know she was watched. She would have died before she danced had she known. She had trained her whole life to feel nothing, visibly in front of others, and this hour, this ballroom, this borrowed music, was the one place she had permitted herself to feel at all. The Duke of Harrowmere stood in the shadow of the minstrels' gallery above, and he did not move. He had come down from his study at 11:30 because he could not sleep, and he could not sleep because the trustees were arriving in the morning, and the trustees were arriving in the morning because his wife had been dead these 11 months, and his sons remained, in the eyes of the law, without a mother. He had walked the corridor with a lamp and put it down at the gallery door because he had heard humming. And humming in a house where no one had sung since Isabel died was a thing that stopped a man in his tracks. He had climbed the gallery stairs expecting a maid. He had found instead the housekeeper his cousin had installed 6 months ago, alone in his ballroom, dancing as though the room had been built for her. Marcus Ravenshaw was 42. He had inherited a dukedom at 19 and a widowerhood at 41, and he had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. He did not, as a rule, watch women. He did not, as a rule, watch anyone. He was watched ceaselessly, and had long ago learned to look through rooms rather than at them. But he watched Mrs. Ashford now. He noticed first that she was humming a piece his mother used to play. He noticed, second, that her feet knew the count without her looking down. He noticed, third, that she was smiling. He had not, in 6 months, seen her smile. He had assumed, without particularly considering the matter, that she did not. She kept his household as a good housekeeper keeps a household, quietly, without fuss, with a competence he had not credited because it had spared him the trouble of crediting anything. She had come from his cousin Lady Marwood's establishment, with a stiff character and a stiffer curtsy, and he had approved her because his cousin had said the word capable twice, and capable was the word he required. He had never seen the woman capable was attached to. She turned again on the rose, and the light from the 2 remaining sconces caught her full in the face, and he saw, because he could not help it, because he was a man who noticed and had always been, that she was, at this moment, in this room, extraordinarily beautiful. Not by the measure the ton kept in its little painted book. By the older measure. By the measure of a face wholly absorbed in its own joy, unaware of being seen. Her cheeks were flushed, her lashes lowered, her mouth curved in the private curve of a woman who has not been watched in a very long time. He did not step back from the balustrade, neither did he step forward. He watched her finish the waltz. 3 full circuits of the rose, no more. And he watched her come to a stop. And he watched her curtsy to the empty air with a gravity that undid something small and rusted in his chest. Then she covered her face with both hands and stood a moment, breathing, and he understood that she was steadying herself because she had almost cried. He turned. He went silently back down the gallery stair. He did not put on his lamp again until he had reached his study, and he sat down at his desk. And he did not, for a long while, know what to do with what he had seen. A cold man is not undone all at once. But a cold man may be undone in small degrees, and Marcus Ravenshaw, that midnight, was undone by perhaps a single degree, and it was enough that when he lifted his pen to write his trustees a further letter of postponement, he found he could not remember the phrases he had meant to use. Verity, meanwhile, had let herself out of the ballroom and gone quietly along the servants' stair to her own small room above the linen cupboard, and she had unlaced her stays with hands that would not stop trembling, and she had sat on the edge of the bed a long time before she slept. She had promised herself, when she took this post, that she would not want anything from this house. She had already broken the promise. She had wanted the ballroom, and she had taken it. And now she must be more careful than ever before. She did not know yet that she had already been caught. The trustees arrived at 11 the next morning, 3 of them, in a black carriage with the Wycliffe arms upon it, and Verity received them in the front hall as a housekeeper receives such men, invisibly, efficiently, without a wasted word. She saw to their coats. She saw to the hot water. She saw the eldest, Sir Rupert Wycliffe, look through her as if she were furniture, and she folded that look away into the small locked box inside her chest where she kept such things, and she went about her mourning. The Duke sent for her at 1:30. This was so unusual that Mrs. Halloway, the cook, stopped kneading her pastry and said, "For you? In the study? You're sure he said Mrs. Ashford and not Mr. Alton?" Alton was the steward. Alton was always sent for. Verity was not. Verity was the woman who counted the linens, and settled the maids, and reminded the butler quietly when the wine was running low. She was not summoned to studies. He said, "Mrs. Ashford," said the footman, who looked as puzzled as anyone. Verity took off her apron. She tucked a curl of dark hair behind her ear. She did not permit her hand to shake, because her hand did not shake in this house. Her hand was steady, and her voice was low, and her face was composed. And this had been true of her for 11 years, and would be true today. She knocked at the study door. He said, "Come." The study at Harrowmere had been the old Duke's, and his father's before him. It was lined with books no one had opened since the last century, and it smelt of leather and cold ash and the particular dry sweetness of very good ink. Has? Marcus Ravenshaw stood at the window with his back to the door, and he did not turn as she entered, and she stood a moment in silence and looked at the length of him, dark coat, dark hair, the set of his shoulders that a portrait painter would have loved, and a wife might have found unreadable. "Mrs. Ashford," he said at last, and turned. He looked at her. He looked at her, and she felt for the first time in half a year that a person in this house was looking at her, and she did not know where to put the sensation. "Your Grace." "Sit." She sat. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She waited. "I have," he said, "a matter of some delicacy to put to you. I will speak plainly because I have not the time for anything else. My trustees are downstairs. They have given me until Michaelmas to produce a wife, or forfeit the guardianship of my sons to my cousin Lady Marwood. Michaelmas is in 9 days. She did not move. She did not blink. She said, evenly, "I see, Your Grace." "I doubt that you do. There is no lady in the county to whom I could propose in 9 days without provoking the sort of talk that would harm my sons more than the loss of them to my cousin, and there is no lady of my acquaintance whom I would trust within a mile of a nursery. My cousin, whom you know, wishes the boys because they come with an estate she has coveted since she was 12. She will not have them. No, Your Grace, you have kept this house 6 months. My cousin recommended you. It is one of the few useful things she has ever done, though she does not know she has done it." Verity's mouth was dry. She waited. "I need a wife by Tuesday. My sons need a mother. And desperate. You need, I do not presume to know what you need, but I know what my cousin pays you, and I know what she permitted you before that, and I do not think you have been treated as a woman of your character ought to be treated in either place. I am proposing marriage. It is not a romantic proposal. I have no capacity at present for a romantic proposal. It is a proposal of arrangement, and I will not pretend otherwise, and I ask you to consider it as such." There was a silence in which she could hear the fire and the clock and her own steady pulse, and beneath all of it the faint, uncanny echo of a waltz. She said, "Your Grace, before I answer anything, you will tell me the truth. All of it. I do not bargain with half a story." He looked at her a moment longer. She saw something move at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The memory of what a smile had once been. "Very well," he said. And he sat down opposite her, and he told her. He told her of Isabel, who had died of a fever in the March of the previous year, and of the boys, Tobias, who was 7, and Crispin, who was 5, and of Crispin, who had not spoken above a whisper since his mother's burial. He told her of his cousin Lady Marwood, who had come to the funeral in a gown too fine for grief, and had put her hand on his arm before the earth was closed, and had said, "My dear, you cannot possibly manage those children. You had better let me have them." He told her of the trustees appointed under Isabel's marriage settlement, who had the power, if he did not remarry within 18 months of his wife's death, to place the children in the guardianship of the nearest suitable female relative. He told her he had spent those 18 months believing he could outlast the claws, and could not, and had run out of days. He did not tell her that he had watched her dance. She listened, without interruption. When he was done, she said, "And Crispin, when did he last speak aloud?" He blinked. It was not the question he had expected. "March," he said, "the morning of his mother's funeral." He sang the hymn she had chosen, or tried to. He faltered. Someone, I do not know who. There were many mourners told him he must stop, that his singing was tiring his mother's soul on its journey. He was 4 years old. He has not sung since. He barely speaks. He believes his voice killed her, Verity said, quietly, more to herself than to him. The Duke stared at her. I had not, he said, understood it in those words. Someone should have. Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive. She sat a moment. She looked down at her folded hands. When she raised her eyes, they were very clear. Your Grace, she said, I will not enter your house as decoration. I have been decoration in other houses. I will not be it again. If I am to be your wife, I will have authority in the nursery. Real authority, not the sort that yields the moment your cousin sends a letter. I will have your word that the late Duchess is not to be erased from her sons' lives. Her portrait will remain where it hangs. Her music will be sung again in this house, when the boys are ready, and no one, not even I, will pretend she did not exist. I will not be introduced to your household as a stopgap, or as hired help wearing a ring. If we do this, we do it as though we meant it, and we let no one in this county see the seams. He said nothing for a long moment. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a locked room he has walked past for years without knowing what was behind the door. I agree to every condition, he said. There is one more. Name it. You will not lie to me. Juan. Not about your sons, not about your cousin, not about your feelings, whatever they turn out to be. I would rather be told nothing than told a comfortable thing that is not true. I will not lie to you, he said. And then, very quietly, as if surprised to hear himself say it, I do not think I could, Mrs. Ashford. I think you would know. She rose. She curtsied. A proper curtsy, the sort her mother had taught her in the rose garden, long since sold. Deeper than a housekeeper's, shallower than a duchess's. Exactly the curtsy of a woman between one life and another. Then I accept, Your Grace, Marcus. Not yet, she said. When we are married, perhaps. Not before. It would not be honest before. He inclined his head, and she thought she was almost sure that he was smiling. The marriage was performed by special license on the following Tuesday morning in the private chapel of Harrowmere, before the trustees, the cousin, 3 servants, and the boys. Verity wore a gown of pale gray silk that Mrs. Halloway and 2 of the maids had sat up 2 nights to remake from something of the late Duchess's, and she had wept only once in private at the alteration, and had told the seamstress it was a fine gown and must not be wasted, and had put the tears away. Lady Marwood, sitting in the front pew in a hat that could have sheltered a small horse, watched the ceremony with the fixed smile of a woman whose plans have been publicly overturned and who intends to spend the rest of her life overturning them back. When Verity walked down the short aisle on the arm of Mr. Alton, the steward, who had volunteered with a gruff kindness that had almost undone her, Lady Marwood turned to her sister and said quite audibly, At least the linens will be well kept. At least the linens will be well kept. Verity did not falter. She did not turn her head. She reached the altar, and she looked at Marcus Ravenshaw. And he looked back at her, and she saw in his eyes that he had heard the remark and that he was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, actively holding himself back from doing violence to a woman of his own family. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not now, not here. He obeyed her. They exchanged vows, the rings, Isabel's, cleaned and resized. Verity had asked for this herself, and he had understood, went on. The trustees, cornered by their own document, signed the marriage register with the sour precision of men who had wanted to be right and had been made irrelevant instead. Sir Rupert Wickliffe congratulated the Duke, with a face like a lemon, and did not congratulate the Duchess at all. The Duchess of Harrowmere. Verity heard the words in the chapel bell, and did not, for one long moment, know they meant her. Tobias, 7 years old, and grave as a small judge, came forward when the register was signed, and made her a bow that had clearly been rehearsed, and said, "How do you do, Madam Crispin?" 5 years old, did not come forward. He stood by his father's leg, and looked at her with enormous dark eyes, and did not speak. She did not kneel to him. She did not force him. She said only, "Good morning, Crispin," in the same tone she used with the housekeeper's cat, and she smiled at him, without demanding a smile back, and she saw his fingers tighten in the folds of his father's coat, and then, after a long moment, relax. That, she thought. Only that it is enough for today. The cold house did not warm at once. It would have been a lie to say it did. In the first week, Verity moved into the Duchess's rooms, which had been shut since Isabel's death, and she opened the curtains with her own hands, and she opened the windows, and she stood in the middle of the pale blue sitting room, and let a year of stale air out, and 11 months of March sunlight in, and she thought, "This is a room that has been holding its breath." She did not move any of Isabel's things. She had them cleaned and put in order. She placed the miniature of Isabel that had been face down on the writing desk, upright again, and she said aloud to the empty room, "You were loved. I will not pretend you are not. I only need to sit here for a little while. If you can bear it." The room, she felt, could bear it. The boys were harder. Tobias watched her, the way a small, careful animal watches a larger one, waiting to learn whether the larger animal bites. Crispin did not watch her at all. He watched the floor, the window, his father, his nurse, anything but her. She did not force herself on either of them. She sat in the schoolroom in the mornings with her mending, because she had never learned to be idle, and she let them come to her when they came. Tobias came first. He came on the 4th morning, and he stood beside her chair, and he said, "Madam, my father says you know Latin a little. The governess said I could not learn Caesar until I was 10. The governess was wrong." He looked at her. She looked at him. She reached, without breaking the look, into her work-basket, and drew out a small worn copy of Caesar's Gallic Wars that had belonged to her father, and she put it in his hands. "Chapter the 1st, she said. When you are stuck, come to me. Do not come to me until you are stuck. I have no patience with children who will not try." He went away with the book pressed against his chest as if it were a puppy, and he did not come back for 2 hours, and when he did, he had translated 4 lines correctly and 1 line wrongly, and she praised the 4 and made him laugh at the 5th, and the whole nursery watched, out of the corners of their eyes. But by evening the atmosphere in the West Wing had shifted by a very small measurable degree. Crispin took longer. She discovered him, on the 6th day, in the ballroom. She had gone there again alone, after the house had gone quiet, because she had needed the room. She had told herself she would not dance this time. She was a duchess now, and duchesses did not creep down to their own ballrooms and waltz alone. But she had gone. She had stepped out onto the rose. She had raised her arms. And she had heard, from behind a heavy velvet curtain at the far end of the room, a very small intake of breath. She did not move. "Crispin," she said quietly, without turning. "You are welcome to stay. You are welcome to go. I will not tell anyone." The curtain did not move. There was a long silence. She lowered her arms slowly, and she went and sat on the bench at the edge of the dais, and she did not look toward the curtain, and after, perhaps 5 minutes, she heard a small pair of slippered feet cross the floor and stop in front of her. She did not lift her head. "Madam," said Crispin in the smallest whisper she had ever heard. "Were you going to sing?" She lifted her head then. She kept her face very still, because she understood, with the clarity of a thing seen from a mountain, that a great deal depended on the next minute. "I was going to hum," she said. "I do not sing well." "Oh, do you sing well, Crispin?" He looked at the floor. He did not answer. "You need not tell me," she said. "I only wondered. Because your mother sang. Your father told me." "She sang the hymn," he whispered. "At the end." "Yes, I sang too. In the church. And someone said—" "I know what someone said." He looked up at her. His eyes were enormous and very bright. "It was not true, Crispin." He did not speak. "Your voice did not tire your mother. Your voice was a comfort to her. Voices do not do that. Fevers do that. A fever took her, not you. You may believe me or not believe me, and I will not push you, but I will tell you the true thing every time you ask, and I will not lie about it, and I will not pretend it is a small matter." He stood a long time in front of her. He did not weep. He did not speak. Then, very slowly, he reached out and put one small hand on her knee, and left it there for the space of 3 breaths, and then took it away, and turned, and walked out of the ballroom without a sound. She sat on the bench in the empty room, and pressed both hands over her mouth and did not herself weep. There would be time for weeping later. There had not been time yet. She did not know that Marcus Ravenshaw had, once again, been standing in the gallery above, and had heard every word. He came to her that night, in the small sitting room where she had taken to writing her correspondence. He knocked at the door. He had always knocked. It was one of the first things she had noticed about him. And he came in, and he stood a moment, as if he did not know what he had come to say. "You were in the ballroom," he said at last. "Jess, with Crispin." Jess told him the truth. I promised I would not lie to him. I would not begin with him. Marcus Ravenshaw crossed the room and sat down opposite her, and he was, for a long moment, entirely silent. Then he said, "I have been his father for 5 years, and I did not know he believed that. You could not have known. He did not tell you. He told no one. He carried it alone, because he thought it was a poison in him, and he did not want to poison you also. He is a good boy, your grace. He was protecting you." Marcus Ravenshaw put his face in his hands. She did not move. She did not go to him. She had promised herself she would not perform any tenderness. She did not mean, and she did not yet know what she meant. She sat where she was, and she waited, and after a long time he raised his head and looked at her, and his eyes were red, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Verity," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. "I do not know how to thank you. Do not thank me yet." He has said one sentence. He has a great deal of ground to cover. You will help him cover it. "I will try. You will succeed," he said, "because you are." He stopped. He seemed to consider a word, and reject it, and consider another, and reject it also. In the end he said only, "Because you are yourself." I did not until this week understand what that meant. She did not answer, because she did not trust her voice. He looked at her a moment longer, then he rose, and he went to the door, and he paused there. "Mrs. Halloway told me," he said without turning, "that in your last post my cousin used to send you down to the kitchens to eat, because she said a woman of your size was not decorative at her table. Is that true?" Verity's hands went still on the writing desk. "Yes," she said evenly. Then it is a great pity for my cousin, said the Duke of Harrowmere, because she will find at Michaelmas dinner that a woman of your size is at the head of my table, and that she is not there. He went out. Verity sat a very long time before she moved. Then she blew out the candle, and she went to bed, and she slept, for the first time in 11 years, without counting anything. The weeks that followed were the strangest of her life, because they were the happiest, and she did not trust happiness. She had been taught, by her father's ruin and her aunt's charity, and her cousin's contempt, that happiness, in her circumstances, was a form of forgetfulness, and that a woman who forgot would be punished for it. So she did not forget. She kept the ledgers, she oversaw the linens. She met with Mr. Alton every Monday morning, and went through the estate accounts because Marcus had asked her to, and had discovered, with a wry twist of the mouth she was coming to recognize, that she read a ledger better than his steward did. She sat with Tobias over Caesar, and she sat with Crispin over nothing at all, because Crispin, she had learned, healed in silence and could not be hurried. She dined at the head of the table. She wore Isabel's remade gowns, and gradually, gowns of her own, ordered by Marcus from a dressmaker in town, without consulting her, which had made her furious for a full afternoon and grateful for a full night. She learned that her husband, for she had begun, the private country of her own head, to call him her husband, was a man who noticed everything and said very little of it, and that his noticing was his affection, and that he had, without her realizing, begun to arrange the whole rhythm of the house around her comfort. The fire in her sitting room was lit before she came in of an evening. The book she had left half read the night before was moved to her bedside without comment. The maid stopped scurrying when she passed, and began to greet her, quietly, as one greets a person and not a post, pause. Mrs. Halloway made her favorite pudding on Thursdays, without being told it was her favorite, because Marcus, she discovered later, had asked. He had asked. He had asked what she liked. No one in her adult life had asked what she liked. He did not touch her. He had said, at the start, that this was not a romantic arrangement, and he was a man who kept his word until his word was formally released. But he sat with her in the library in the evenings, and he read aloud to her from the papers, and he made her laugh once by imitating Sir Rupert Wycliffe, and she made him laugh, startled him into it, with a dry remark about Lady Marwood's hat, and something in the room shifted that neither of them named. Lady Marwood did not, however, remain absent. She came to call on the second Tuesday in October in a carriage with 2 grooms, and she brought her sister, Lady Selina Fenmore, and she brought a small folded document in her reticule, which she did not produce until she had drunk her tea and eaten 3 slices of cake, and complimented Verity twice. Managed, she said, and smiled. Managed. It is such a useful word. Do you not find it, cousin? Some women are for managing, and some are for being the mistress of a house, and you have such a gift for the first. Dear Mrs. Ashford, forgive me, Duchess, that I have brought you a very small piece of unhappy news, which I have taken pains to bring to you, gently, in person, rather than by letter. Verity did not touch her tea. She said, Please continue, Lady Marwood. It concerns your father. My father is dead. Your father died in debt, and one of those debts, a small one, no more than £400, was owed to my late husband's estate. I have papers here. I am afraid the papers show that the debt was signed for in part by you. You were of age when he took the loan. And I have been advised by counsel that under the terms, dear cousin, of course, under the terms, the debt now falls to you. And being married, £400 is nothing to a duke. But it is such a pity to begin a marriage with the shadow of your father's failures upon it, is it not? I thought it best to bring it to you privately, so that the matter might be settled without vulgarity. She set the paper on the tea table. Her smile did not move. Verity looked at the paper. She looked at her cousin's hand upon it. She thought in a very clear, cold voice at the back of her head. This is not about £400. This is about my sitting at the head of the table you meant to sit at. This is a beginning, not an end, she said. May I see it? Of course, dear. Verity picked up the paper. She unfolded it. She read it, slowly, twice. Her father had been a barrister before his ruin, and a good one, and had taught his only daughter to read a document the way a musician reads a score. For what was there, and for what had been left out. She read this document the second time for what had been left out. She saw at once that the signature purporting to be hers was not hers. She saw that the date given was a date on which she had verifiably been in Yorkshire attending her mother's funeral. She saw that the sum had been altered, the 4 had been written over a 2, and that the alteration had been done neatly, but not neatly enough, for a woman who had spent 9 years reading account books. She set the paper down. Lady Marwood, she said, in the tone one uses to a child who has broken a cup, you have brought me a forgery. Lady Marwood's smile flickered. I beg your pardon, you have brought me a forgery. The signature is not mine. The date is one on which I was not in London. The sum has been altered. If this were shown to any magistrate in the county, and if the magistrate were then to send for the original ledger of my father's debts, which I keep and which is upstairs in this house, the result would not be £400 owed by me to your estate. It would be a charge of forgery against whoever brought this paper into being. I do not accuse you of forging it yourself, but I will ask you plainly who did, and I will ask it now, and I will ask it only once. The room was silent. Lady Selina Fenmore, in the second chair, went very pale. Lady Marwood recovered first. She laughed, a bright, brittle laugh, and said, Cousin, you are overwrought. Truly, the strain of your new position, I am not overwrought. I am £24 short of 30, and I have kept my own account since I was 17. And I am not overwrought. Who forged the paper? Lady Marwood. The door of the drawing-room opened. Marcus Ravenshaw stood in it. She did not know how long he had been there. Long enough, she saw. Long enough, cousin, he said, in a voice so mild it stopped the breath in the room. I believe my wife asked you a question. Lady Marwood rose. Her hands were shaking, and she was trying not to let them, and Verity, who knew that particular effort intimately, felt a strange, short-lived pang for her, the pang of one performer for another whose performance has cracked. I have been ill-advised, Lady Marwood said. My man of business. I shall dismiss him at once. I had no notion. I brought the paper in good faith. You will leave the paper, Marcus said. Of course. You will leave this house. Marcus, you will not return to it until my wife invites you. She will not invite you soon. Good afternoon, cousin. Lady Marwood left. Lady Selina Fenmore left with her, quite silently, and Verity saw at the last moment that Lady Selina looked back once, and that the look was not loyalty, but relief. She filed that away also. The door closed. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped in front of her, and he did not touch her. He only looked at her and he said, How did you know? My father taught me. Your father taught you to read a forgery at 4 paces. He said one day, I might need to. Your father, said Marcus Ravenshaw, was a great man. He was a ruined man. Those are not opposites, Verity. She looked up at him. She said, very quietly, because she was afraid of her own voice, Thank you. For what? For coming in when you did. For not doubting me in front of her. I had prepared myself to be doubted. You will not, he said. be doubted. In this house, he did not touch her. She thought afterwards that if he had touched her, then she would have wept, and she did not wish to weep in front of him yet. She wished the weeping, when it came, to come at a moment of her choosing. So she was glad, and sorry, and glad again, that he only stood a moment and then bowed, and went out, and left the forged paper on the table between them as if it were a defeated animal. The trouble, of course, was not over. Lady Marwood was not a woman to be defeated by an afternoon. She was a woman to be defeated by an evening, in public, in front of witnesses, and both Verity and Marcus knew it. Within a week the county was thick with whispers. The new Duchess of Harrowmere, said the whispers, was a housekeeper. The new Duchess of Harrowmere had been dismissed from her last post for theft. The new Duchess of Harrowmere had forged her own father's debts to escape them, and the Duke, poor deceived man, had married her before he learned the truth. The new Duchess of Harrowmere was too large to bear a Duke a proper heir, and this was known, said the whispers, on medical authority, though the medical authority in question was never quite named. Verity heard the whispers because Mrs. Holloway heard them at market and told her, on principle, because Mrs. Holloway said a mistress who did not know what was being said of her was a mistress who could not defend herself. Verity thanked her, and kept her face composed, and went upstairs and sat in her sitting-room and did not quite cry. Marcus heard the whispers from Mr. Alton, and did not keep his face composed at all, and rode into town that afternoon, and paid 3 calls of a nature Mr. Alton refused, later, to describe to anyone. The Michaelmas ball was to be held on the last Friday of October. It had been Isabel's ball, and had not been held since her death, and Marcus had told Verity, at the beginning of the month, that he wished to revive it if she was willing, and she had said she was willing, and then had spent a great many nights wondering what in the name of heaven she had agreed to. The whole county would come. Lady Marwood would come. The invitation could not be withdrawn without a scandal larger than the one it would prevent, and the whole county would be watching to see the housekeeper Duchess try to preside over a great room, and the whole county would be waiting, with the patience of vultures, to see her fail. She did not tell Marcus she was afraid. She did not need to. He knew. On the night of the ball, she stood in her dressing-room in a gown of deep midnight blue silk that had been made for her. This time not remade. Marcus had insisted, and she had not, in the end, argued. And her maid, a plain, sensible girl, named Hannah, who had begun as skeptical, was fastening the last of the pearls at the back of her neck, and Verity looked at herself in the long glass, and did not know the woman she saw. The woman she saw was large, and therefore there was no disguising it, and Verity, who had heard every possible word for it, would not have disguised it if she could. But the woman she saw was also, undeniably, a duchess. The silk fell as silk falls on a woman who has been fitted for it. The pearls suited her throat. Her dark hair was piled and pinned, and her color was high. And her eyes, she noticed with a small shock, were not the eyes of a housekeeper. They were the eyes of a woman who had lately been told by a man she was coming to love, that she would not be doubted in this house. There was a soft knock at the dressing-room door. Marcus came in. He stopped, just inside. He looked at her. He did not, at once, speak. When he did, he said only, "You are beautiful, Verity. You do not have to say that. I know I do not. I am saying it because it is true. I have been saying it to myself for 2 weeks. I thought I had better say it to you before I said it downstairs to 200 people." She looked at him. She said, "Marcus." "Not yet," he said, gently. "Not yet. And not because of the ball. When I say it fully, I want to say it in a quiet room, and I want you to have no doubt that it is not gratitude, and not necessity, and not any of the other things a man might mistake for love. So not yet. But I wanted you to know that I was not, this evening, going to be pretending anything. Because I do not, in fact, pretend anything. Where you are concerned, I find I have lost the trick of it." He offered her his arm. She took it. They went down together. The ballroom was full when they entered. 200 candles, uncovered chandelier, the great faded rose on the parquet, polished to a shine, and all along the walls the county, in silk and jewels, turned to look, and the turn had in it the small ugly hunger that Verity had been braced for since she was 17. Lady Marwood was near the front. She wore white. She smiled. Marcus led Verity to the center of the floor. He was not a man who spoke to rooms. She knew that. He had made perhaps a dozen speeches in his life, most of them under duress, and he had told her the previous night that he did not intend to make one this evening. He made one anyway. "My friends," he said, and the room quieted. Because when a Duke of Harrowmere spoke, even at his own ball, one did not talk over him. "You have come tonight to a house that has not held a ball in nearly 2 years. You know why. You knew my wife Isabel. You loved her. Some of you. I loved her. She is not forgotten in this house, and she will not be. Her portrait is in the long gallery. Her hymn will be sung on Christmas Eve. Her sons speak of her freely, and one of her sons, whom some of you had believed lost to silence, spoke his mother's name aloud last Sunday morning, in the schoolroom for the first time in 19 months. The room went very still. He spoke it, Marcus said, because of the woman standing beside me. My cousin, Lady Marwood, and certain persons who have taken their opinions from her, have been kind enough to spread, in this county, a number of interesting stories about my wife. I will address them once. She was not dismissed from any post for theft. She was not dismissed at all. She left my cousin's employ to enter mine, at my cousin's own recommendation, which my cousin is now welcome to regret at her leisure. She did not forge her father's debts. Her father left no debts to her, and any paper suggesting otherwise is a forgery, and the forgery is known, and the person responsible is known, and I have chosen, this evening, out of respect for the memory of my late wife, who did not care for public unpleasantness, not to name them. Yet, Lady Marwood had gone the color of paper. She is not, Marcus continued, and his voice was perfectly even, unfit to be the mother of my sons. She is the reason my younger son speaks. She is not unfit to sit at the head of my table. She has sat at it since Michaelmas, and my table has been the better for it. She is not, as certain persons have observed, a small woman. She is not. She is exactly the size she is, and she is beautiful, and I am not a man who wastes the word beautiful. And I say it deliberately, in this room, before every one of you, so that no person of my acquaintance may ever again pretend not to have heard it. She endured much before she came to this house, and she has endured a good deal since, and cruelty seems already abundant this evening. I see no reason to add mine. But I will say this, once, and finally. She is my wife. She is the Duchess of Harrowmere. She stayed when no one asked her to and no one made her, and she stayed for my sons, and she stayed for me, and any person in this county who cannot receive her as such will find, on future occasions, that they are not received here. He turned, he offered her his hand. "Duchess," he said, "will you dance?" Verity could not for one moment speak. Then she said, and her voice was perfectly steady, because she had trained it to be steady in front of others. Since she was 17 and would not lose the trick of it now, "I will, Your Grace." He led her to the great faded rose at the center of the floor. The orchestra had been given, that morning, a piece of music to prepare. Verity did not know they had been given it. Marcus had chosen it himself. The first notes rose, Viennese, soft, sorrowful, and dear, and Verity's breath caught, because it was her mother's waltz. It was the waltz she had hummed alone in this room past midnight 6 weeks ago, thinking herself unseen. She looked up at her husband. "You saw me," she said. "I saw you. I have seen you since. I did not know how to tell you that I had, and then I found I did not need to. Because you were already the person I had watched, and there was no separating the woman in the ballroom from the woman in my study. And I did not wish to separate them. Dance with me, Verity." She danced with him. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. She had rehearsed the steps 1,000 times alone, and she rehearsed them now with a partner. And the partner was her husband, and the room watched, and the room was for the length of that dance entirely silent, because there are some things a county sees, and cannot pretend not to have seen. She saw, at the edge of the floor, Tobias standing with his nurse in a state of solemn wonder. She saw Crispin, small and dark-eyed, holding Mrs. Holloway's hand. She saw Lady Marwood turn, at the third circuit, and leave the ballroom. And she saw that Lady Marwood was not followed. At the end of the waltz, Marcus bowed to her, and she curtsied to him. Exactly the curtsy her mother had taught her in the rose garden long since sold. And the room, after a beat of silence, began to applaud, and the applause was neither dutiful nor sparse. It was the applause of a county that had, quite against its own intentions, been moved. Crispin let go of Mrs. Holloway's hand. He walked out onto the floor. He was 5 years old, and he was very small, and he crossed the great faded rows with the gravity of a person twice his age, and he stopped in front of Verity, and he did not whisper this time. He said in a voice that was small but clear, and heard by every person in the room, "Good night, Mama." Verity knelt. She was a large woman, in a heavy silk gown, and she knelt in the middle of the ballroom, without care for either. And she opened her arms, and Crispin, after one long considering look, walked into them. And she held him, and she did not weep, because she had promised herself she would not weep in this room. And she kept her promises. Marcus stood over them both. He was not a man who wept in ballrooms either. He did not weep, but his hand, when he laid it on Verity's shoulder, was not entirely steady, and she felt it, and she did not remark on it, because there are some things a wife notices and does not name. Tobias came forward too, more slowly, as elder brothers do. He made her his practice bow. He said "Madam," and stopped, and thought, and corrected himself, "Mamma," and the word was newer in his mouth than in his brother's, and cost him more. And she understood the cost, and she nodded to him gravely, as one adult to another. The county, watching, understood at last what it had been watching. Lady Marwood was not seen at Harrowmere again. She removed to Bath in the following spring, on the polite fiction of her health, and she was not asked back. Her sister Lady Selina wrote Verity a private letter at Christmas, apologizing, in careful terms, for what she had known and had not said. And Verity wrote her a careful reply, neither forgiving nor withholding forgiveness, and left the door ajar because her father had taught her that doors were harder to open again than to leave ajar in the first place. The forged paper was quietly investigated. The forger, a clerk of Lady Marwood's man of business, was found and dismissed, and warned. Marcus, who could have prosecuted, chose not to. At Verity's request, because Verity had said, "She is finished in this county already. Let us not need to be cruel, as well as right." Marcus had looked at her a long moment, and had said, "You will have to teach me that trick, Duchess. I have not learned it yet." And Verity had said, "You have. You simply do not know it." The confession, when it came in the library. On a night in December when the boys were asleep, and the fire was low and the snow was falling outside the long windows in the particular soft way it fell only at Harrowmere. Marcus had put down his book. Verity had put down her sewing. They had looked at each other across the small distance of the hearthrug. And Marcus had said, very quietly. Verity? Yes, I have been a coward with you. You have not. I have. I told you in October that when I said it fully, I would say it in a quiet room, and I would say it in such a way that you could have no doubt it was not gratitude. And I have been waiting ever since for the right room and the right night. And I have understood this evening, and that if I wait any longer I shall be a worse coward. So I will say it now. And badly, and you must forgive the badness. Marcus, I love you, he said. I have loved you since a night in September when I stood in the gallery of my own ballroom and watched a woman I had barely spoken to dance alone, to a piece of music my mother used to play, and I understood, watching her, that I had been asleep for 11 months, and that I had been half asleep for a great many years before that, and that I was not, in fact going to be permitted to remain asleep, because a woman had walked into my house who intended, without in the least intending it, to wake me. I did not know your name properly then. I know it now. I would like if you will permit me to say it every morning for the rest of my life. Verity did not for a long moment speak. Then she said quietly, Do not say it, if it is only gratitude. Marcus, I could bear a great many things. I could not bear that. It is not gratitude. Are you certain? I am certain. Gratitude would have proposed to you in September. Love waited until December because it was afraid of getting the words wrong. Gratitude does not lose the trick of pretending. I have lost the trick of pretending anywhere near you, and I did not lose it because you saved my son, though you did, and I did not lose it because you saved my house, though you did that also. I lost it because you set your conditions in my study on the first day, and you looked at me as though you were not afraid of me, and no person of my acquaintance had looked at me without fear or calculation in 20 years. And I understood, in that hour, that the rest of my life would be lived in the direction of that look. Verity, say something. She rose. She crossed the hearthrug. She sat down beside him, not opposite him, and she took his hand, the first time she had taken his hand of her own accord, and she said, I love you also. I have loved you since the afternoon you told your cousin that a woman of my size would sit at the head of your table, and she would not. I did not know it was love then. I thought it was relief. I have since had time to tell the difference. He kissed her. It was not a practiced kiss. Neither of them had, in any real sense, been practiced. It was clumsy, and slow, and true, and it went on longer than either of them had planned. And when it ended, Verity found that she was at last weeping, and that she did not mind, because the room was quiet, and the fire was low. And the man she had married for a bargain in September was holding her in December, because he could not imagine doing anything else. Marcus, she said against his shoulder. Why,